because my web again had allowed for the possibility that God existed, I said maybe this could have happened. That was my thought. I became open to it.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Okay, now we're getting to the questions that I want to have answered.
Now, God could convince me. It's one thing if God does what he knows it would take to convince me, and I'm still like, nope, I won't believe. Okay, that's on me.
Now, that opens up a whole can of worms that I didn't really investigate until much later, which is like, your philosophy of history, which document. And you mentioned this. You mentioned at the very beginning, I have it written right here, trust issues.
If he exists. Because I don't know what to do other than, wait for him to win back my faith. Like he won you back. You know what I mean? He could win me back. So yeah, we could just go ahead and just kind of dive in. I have no agenda. I have no we have to talk about this or we have to do that. I'm not trying to convince you to deconvert again. I've got no agenda. I read your comment under one of our videos, and when you said what you said, I just said, well, that's a very interesting story. For my own benefit, I would just love to hear the ins and outs of that story. And then for listeners, but then I'm sure there are things that you would probably want to ask me that you think would be good to kind of flesh out. So I just was like, I'm all in for wherever the conversation can go. So that's why I was like, let's go ahead and do this. So
I definitely wanted to kind of, I guess, aim it more biographical, if that makes sense. Because I know you talked a lot about, I saw your original video where you talked about your deconversion process. And it was a 24-minute one where you're like in a backyard or something.
Yeah.
So I remember watching that, and I remember having a lot of questions. And then you had your interview with Myth Vision, which I think was much more detailed. That was a really good interview. But I still had some questions.
Right.
I decided to reach out to you, and I'm glad, man. I'm really happy that you decided to get in touch. But
yeah, that's what's up. You're the first person outside of my podcast squad that I'm actually doing a episode with. So this is kind of an inauguration, christen the ship before it leaves the dock episode here. But let's go back before we get into anything that has to do with deconversion or anything. You were familiar with me through Cross Movement?
Correct.
Okay. Very few people are familiar with Cross Movement who are not Christians. So I'm imagining you were a Christian for quite a while.
Correct. Yes. So I think that's a great jump off point. So I grew up, correct. So we had a very similar background. Actually, when I was hearing your story, I was thinking, okay, I can relate to that because I grew up in the charismatic movement myself. I grew up Pentecostal, grew up in an Assemblies of God church. Didn't know that at the time. I just thought it was it's church.
Yeah.
Right. So and we used to go to this this bookstore. There was this big bookstore in Los Angeles back in the day called Valley Book and Bible.
Okay.
And my brother used to go, and he used to take me to the store, and he used to just listen to all these Christian rap albums and just try them out before he would buy them. But he would always get Cross Movement, right, regardless of whether or not what he heard about the album, he'd always get it. Because if I'm not mistaken, his first album, no, it was definitely Heaven's Mentality. That was the first one he got. That was the first one, right? You guys believe?
Yeah.
Yes. So, and then he got Ambassadors Christology, and he's like, no, these guys are the real deal. These guys are the real deal. So that was like a legendary album, in the Christian rap community.
How old were you when your brother was rocking to these tapes and CDs?
I was a kid, man. I was a kid. I was like maybe 9 years old, 10 years old. But I mean, you guys were super talented. I mean, it's interesting because if you listen to those albums, you cannot distinguish it from, like, say, other rap music other than just the sheer message, you know, the lyrical content.
Right.
Otherwise, I mean, lyrically, you guys are on par, in my opinion, with a lot of the same, you know, I don't know, like the wordplay. I never really paid attention to the wordplay until, you know, as I got older, I started to become more conscious of the lyrics. And I'm like, oh man, actually, these guys are saying some crazy stuff.
There was a lot that went into producing that material. Yeah.
I bet. Yeah, man. I bet you guys had some bangers. Like you guys had some bangers, really.
Okay. So you grew up in the church.
Correct.
Charismatic, Pentecostal.
Correct.
We just did an episode on the podcast. I think we just recorded it. I don't know if we released it yet. By the time this comes out, it probably will be. Talking about the charismatic experience. Were you a Pentecostal your entire time as a Christian? Because for those who are watching, we're going to get to the part of the story where you said you deconverted from Christianity, and then at some point you actually reconverted, but to Eastern Orthodox Christianity. So
Oh, I was just gonna say not Eastern Orthodox.
Okay.
Eastern Orthodox, but you know, it's part of my journey that I was trying to figure out. Like, okay, now that I'm a Christian again, I'm kind of, you know, I'm starting over.
Okay.
Wow. I didn't really know where to go. You know?
Okay. So then your entire time as a Christian before you deconverted, were you in the Pentecostal expression that entire time?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. So then what led to your deconversion, I guess?
Yeah. So what happened, the main catalyst, there's just one real big event in my life, which was my mom. So my mother got cancer. Now at the time, you know, charismatic churches, we're big on miracles, we're big on prayer.
Healing,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So here's the thing. I was one of those, I'm not gonna, because you know, you could grow up in a Pentecostal church and have the type of parents who would, you know, make you read your Bible every night. My parents were big on me going to church. You know, there was no Sunday I could take off. You know what I mean? It didn't matter what was going on that Sunday. I had to go to church. I had to be in church. So, but I never actually opened up my Bible and read it. I only did it when I was at church because I mean, you know. But either way, though, I was familiar with the narrative. I was familiar with the stories. You know, Jesus did all these healings, and the apostles, after they received the Holy Spirit, do all these miraculous healings. And so when my mom got sick, my first thought was, okay, no big deal. You know, pray over her, and she's gonna get better. You know, that was just that was what I was thinking was gonna happen. However, it didn't turn out that way. And I would say a couple years later, when I was just before I turned 18, she had passed away from cancer. And of course, that's a very traumatic event for anybody, but especially for a young person. Yeah. And at the time, my thought was, okay, I'm reading these stories in the Bible of this God who splits the Red Sea, you know what I mean? And like feeds these people from heaven. And then I'm looking at my life situation and I'm like, okay, you can do all of this stuff, but you cannot heal someone of their illness, which you apparently do a lot of, you know. So to me, I couldn't buy it, you know, because I thought to myself, either this God is not real or he just doesn't do miracles, or it was that kind of thought process.
Got you.
That let me down, you know, the questioning.
Let me ask you a question. Was your brother's faith as nominal as yours, or was he more in his Bible, believing, knowing all the, or, you know, was there a difference between the two?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that, because he was actually like a youth leader.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, so he would actually, like, especially in his younger days, he would be, you know, one of the, he would preach to the youth, you know, he would preach to the youth. He was looked up to as a big leader, still is, you know, he still is. And so, yeah, at the time, my older brother was definitely, I wouldn't say he was ever, I don't recall him ever being shaken up by the event. So his faith was always very firm.
Okay.
But not me, you know, not me. Not me. But yeah, he loved his word. He loved his scripture. He was always in it, definitely more than I was. I didn't even read the thing, but he definitely was. So
Okay.
if it wasn't for him, to be honest, I wouldn't have been exposed to the cross movement.
Gotcha.
There's no way. So that's what happened. That's basically how the questioning
began.
You know, because it starts with somewhere.
Yeah.
And I guess for you it was more so intellectual in the very beginning. It seemed like.
Well, I wouldn't, and see, that's the thing. A lot of people put my deconversion in the intellectual category, and I think it has to do with two things. One, because it started in seminary, so you think seminary school, and then also because I talk about having these questions that the answers are not satisfactory. But I wouldn't categorize it as intellectual myself. I categorize it as a trust issue. Can I trust the God of the Bible to tell me the truth? So it felt more relational to me than intellectual. But we can get to that, you know, later. So you said you're questioning. Yeah, mine started there, but yours started with that.
Yeah, I need to write that down because otherwise I might
forget.
Okay, so I'm sorry, you wanted me to continue?
Yeah. So we're talking about the origins of it. You said everybody starts somewhere. Yours started with, you know, that traumatic event. You start questioning. How do you end up to the point where you say either God is not real or he doesn't do miracles or care to do miracles? Where do you go from there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. From there, it was the following semester. It was a crazy period because it was summertime. It was right in between, you know, I'm graduating from high school and I'm starting college. And I guess, you know, it's kind of interesting looking back. I should have probably taken a semester off and just kind of like, hey man, reflect on life. You know, you don't have to do anything. But I guess there's always this urgency, like you got to go to college, got to go to college. So I was already enrolled and I decided, all right, cool. I'll just start school. And I decided, you know, to take my questions into academia. Maybe I could find some answers. So I started to take philosophy and religion classes.
So hold on, you teach philosophy right now?
Correct. Yes, I teach philosophy.
When you went to college, was that anywhere in what did you think you were going to do when you first went to college?
That's another good question.
You said biographical, so that's the way we're going with this.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm trying to think back now because, you know, I'm in my 30s now, believe it or not, I'm in my 30s, and I'm trying to reflect back at what my thought process was like at 18, which is a little hazy now. But I think, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I always had in mind that I wanted to teach.
Okay.
And, oh, shoot. Yeah, along the way, I always had in mind that I wanted to teach. Along the way, I had some, you know, maybe I want to do this, maybe I want to do that. But I always deep down, I think, knew I wanted to teach. I wanted to be a teacher. And so what happened was that I thought to myself, if I could find a subject that I enjoyed, you know, I would be able to, teaching would never feel like a job to me. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to teach and what kind of subjects I was into. And I was kind of, but at the same time, I was really in a pursuit of truth, you know, because I was thinking to myself, what if I'm in the wrong religion? You know, I think people have that thought.
Right. But that was connected to because God didn't come through for your family, right?
Correct.
The wrong religion possibility.
Correct. Yeah. And I was thinking to myself, like, you know, just, I guess it was the typical, okay, all these people here in the Middle East, they're Muslim. They say they got the right religion. They're in the right belief. And you got all these, you know, we're in the West, you know, the majority of people are Christian, but a lot of them are becoming now more secular. But at the same time, at least for the Christian type, we think we have the right revelation of the scripture. But then the Hindus say they have it. And then, so I'm thinking to myself, like, dang, what if I'm not in the right, belief, you know? What if I'm not in the right faith? So or what if they're all wrong? I had no
Mm.
idea anymore. I was that, yeah. So that event really
Got you.
propelled me into this direction of what do I do now? Where do I
Got you.
go? Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay.
that's where I was. So I started to take classes in philosophy, classes in religion. You know, initially when I took philosophy, I didn't really like it too much.
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, this is all right, but let me see what else is available. So I took classes on religion,
Mhm.
and after learning about all the different religions, I mean, just religion 101, I became very interested in Judaism.
Hmm.
Because I thought to myself, okay, this kind of makes sense, because if the Bible comes from this Hebrew tradition,
Right.
it would make sense that the Hebrews know their scripture
Right.
too. And I kind of want to know, like, what's the origin, like what's up with the Hebrew Bible,
Mhm.
like the context of Jesus. That became really interesting to me.
Hmm.
It was very strange too. It was a very strange turn of events, because I didn't intend this, but my community college just happened to be the only community college in the nation. We're talking about, like, within the heart of Los Angeles. It's surrounded by a Jewish community.
Hmm.
And so because of that, the community college, I guess they had petitioned or something for like a Hebrew studies department, and they
Hmm.
created. So we had this professor who would teach Hebrew, and then this other professor would teach like Hebrew Bible.
Hmm.
And I was like, yo, this is really cool, because I get exposure, right? To
Right.
like the subject. So I got interested in Judaism, and I thought maybe the Jews got it right. Maybe they rejected Jesus for a reason. And I remember going to the bookstore and buying this book called "Why the Jews Rejected Jesus." Bro, and I remember reading this book and thinking, like, yeah, the Jews are smart people. Like, maybe, maybe they rejected them for a good reason or something. So so that was it, man. It was like the pursuit of truth. I'm like,
Okay.
what is the truth? Because I don't know anybody in the world who says, yeah, I just want to be deceived. Like, no,
Right.
everybody wants to know, like, what is the truth? Who's got it? Because I want to go there, right?
Mhm.
So so I'm reading all these books, and I'm taking Hebrew. And then next thing you know, I take this class on the Hebrew Bible. Now, this is the first time I had to read the Bible for homework. It wasn't just like, Sunday school, go read your Bible, because I'm not going to read my Bible. But now all of a sudden I have to read my Bible for school, and that was a little different. And I got all these textbooks, like, and I'm sure now I heard you reference John J. Collins. Is it John Collins?
Yeah.
So that was the first time I
C.
was
John Collins.
Is it C. John Collins?
So there's
Okay.
two different John Collins. There's one who is a critical scholar. There's one who's a conservative evangelical scholar.
Definitely
C.
not
John Collins is the evangelical.
Okay, not him.
Right. The other one, John J. Collins.
Yes, John J. Collins.
Critical
That's
scholar.
correct. Yes. And I remember reading that book, and man, I was floored. I was floored, because I said, whoa, I never learned this in my life. And it was this book on we have two textbooks in my Hebrew Bible class. It was this book called Who Wrote the Bible? I can't remember who wrote that one, because it's been so long.
Who wrote that book?
Exactly.
Right.
And the second one was that textbook by John Collins. And I remember that one talked about the documentary hypothesis.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the four different sources, and I'm like looking at the Bible now, not even as a holy book. I'm looking at this thing like, yo, this is a man-made book.
Okay.
It's like it's been compiled by these different traditions, and like none of them had the absolute truth, but all of them are kind of trying to put it together. You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
So that was where I was at, and now all of a sudden I'm scratching my head. I'm like, okay, maybe the Bible is just maybe this whole entire Western like Judaism and Christianity are just kind of false. And I started to look at okay, so do the Easterners got it? And then I'm like, well, what if nobody's got it right? You know,
Okay.
maybe, and so I went from I'm a Christian to asking questions.
Okay.
So now I'm skeptical now. I'm not
So
sure what's true.
let me jump in there.
Sure.
I have two minds. I always have two minds because the Christian mind that was developed in me for 30 years, I cannot just delete that. So that mind is still going, even though I don't believe anything the Bible says supernaturally anymore. But I'm hearing you, and I always do this when I hear people's testimonies. And I know there probably are some people who are watching who would say, well, wait, you say you deconverted, then at some point reconverted, but how do you know that you even deconverted? Were you just a cultural Christian? Can you really say that you were a Christian, like you believed the gospel the first time anyway? Maybe you had been churched. And then what faith you had was shaken, but you didn't deconvert because what if somebody said you had never really converted in the first place? Would you say maybe there's some truth to that? Or would you say, no, I really was a Christian. I just wasn't a Bible reading, Christian. How would you respond to that?
I don't think I was a Christian, man. I mean,
Okay.
to be honest with you, I hate to say it like this, but I kind of started to hate Christianity in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I know hate is a very strong word, but it was kind of like when I was reading these books, I kind of just thought to myself, okay, these guys kind of are coming at the Bible objectively.
Mm-hmm.
And all these, I have never read these books. And the reason I've never read these books is because I was never told to, wrestle with these kinds of questions. And because I was never told to wrestle, like, why are they keeping me from knowing this? And, I kind of became resentful, like the more I learned. And I guess, to be honest with you, to address the question more directly, I would say I wasn't a Christian.
Okay.
And the reason I would say I wasn't was because I just later on in the story, I just become an outright atheist. I'm like,
Okay.
I sincerely doubt a God exists. And so, yeah, it was coming out of that atheism, I think, that where I ended up going back to Christianity. But yeah, so I would, to answer the question directly, I would say no. I would say
okay.
Flat out atheist. But yeah, so that's pretty much though, the journey to skepticism. But the Bible though didn't cease to fascinate me.
Okay.
I was not like turned off by it. For me, it just became a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so where do these stories come from? Who put this together?
Right.
Just a different fascination.
Right. Yeah.
Not a spiritual one.
I can relate.
Yeah. So it was an academic fascination, and I thought, this is cool. I could definitely see myself teaching this in the future. This is something the route I would want to go down. So after that, I thought to myself, one thing that would really enhance my Bible learning experience, because learning about documentary hypothesis is cool, source criticism is great, and all that stuff. But one thing that would really enhance my my understanding of the Bible would be to learn the biblical languages. Because I took a year of Hebrew, and I think that was my favorite subject. I'm like, I want to get to know this language more. Right. I wanted to learn Greek. So I applied because I was transferring now. I was getting out of community college. And I ended up applying to really just 2 schools. I applied to a couple, like 3 or 4, I think. I don't remember anymore, but I think I applied to 2 for sure. One of them, which was Baylor, to major in biblical languages, and I think some other major. And then another one was UCLA, and UCLA was like right down the street from where I live. So Baylor was super expensive. I couldn't afford it. It was a private school. I didn't get much money, and I didn't want to be in debt for like 100 years. So I'm like, I'll just go to UCLA. I'll just go to UCLA. Ended up at UCLA, and they obviously don't have a biblical studies a biblical languages department. But they did have a strong classics department, and they're like, look, if you want to learn Greek, you can definitely learn Greek, and you can do Greek and Latin, and you can read like even the church fathers. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah, so that's kind of how I ended up.
So not being a Christian, you still were your whole career was being influenced by a desire to get close to the biblical languages or church documents.
Yeah.
You didn't think that was strange?
No, not at the time. Okay. I think for me, it was more so still fascination.
Fascination. Gotcha.
But the interesting thing was, and I'll get to this in a second. The interesting thing was I was inherently fascinated. I'm not gonna push that to the side. I was fascinated by the historicity of the Bible, but I didn't. To be honest, if I'm gonna be honest with you here, I remember, and I don't really like to talk about it, but I remember I was very, I guess, arrogant. I guess that's the best way I can explain. I hate to use that word for myself, but I was a prick, man. So I remember, for example, when I was that John Collins textbook, I remember vividly one memory where I was, I came home from school and my professor's like, yeah, go read, from this page. I'd go home. As soon as I went home, I start reading, and I would be reading these pages and I'm like, yeah, this is clearly a man-made document. And so, my brother-in-law, he lived with me at the time, and my sister, right, because they're married, and he would come home, he would come to the apartment, and I'd be like, hey man, did you know this story in the Bible's a man? Now they're still Christian. They're still believers. And I just be kind of like asking them questions. Like,
you sound like me on Facebook in 2020, 2022.
I couldn't help it, man. I couldn't help it. And I was like, hey, how do you keep going to church knowing this is just a bunch of bunk? So I was kind of like that. I was very arrogant, I was kind of just, if anything, I was going to school to really kind of prove, like, yo, this is just a bunch of junk. It's interesting. It's interesting. Like, it's interesting. It's fascinating. But I didn't really take it, but yeah, I guess maybe that kind of helps the context a bit.
Yeah.
So anyways, I continue my studies and I'm studying, Greek and Latin. I'm taking my first quarter of Greek. Now at UCLA, we have the quarter system. We don't do semesters there. It was quarters. It's 10 weeks. And it's like, I guess it's designed to be, I don't know what the rationale is. I guess it's like, we have a large student body. We need them to graduate faster, give them the quarter system. And I guess that didn't help me because I don't know about you, but ancient Greek is not something I can pick up really fast. And I was like, dear God, this is hard, because we weren't even learning biblical Greek. It was Attic Greek, and my professor's like, look, if you can pick up this Greek, biblical Greek is going to be like a walk in the park to you. So that kind of motivated me. I said, okay, cool. I'll try to read some Homer and some, but man, it was so hard. And I said to myself, I barely survived my first quarter. I got like a B+. Second quarter, I got like a B- or something. So I'm going into finishing my first year of Greek. I'm like, I'm about to get a C, I don't even know if I could pass this. And I'm like, maybe biblical languages isn't for me. But at the time, I was kind of also taking courses in like Byzantine history, trying to read like, the early church fathers and, the councils that, because again, like the historical context also helps, all these church fathers are getting together and they're like, all right, what's official church doctrine? And learning that was super interesting, learning how important, church doctrine was in the Roman Empire, because you had to determine if this is going to be the state religion. Right. The state's going to have to determine what the beliefs are. So to me, it was more confirmation, like, yeah, this is kind of just man-made. It's, it's kind of like it's very interesting, and I kind of found myself a little, how can I say? Well, I guess I'll just give you an example. You have like Protestants, for the most part, we accept the Trinity, that God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, one God, because they're one substance, but they're three distinct persons. And that stuff came out of the early church, which said, you know, they're going against all these heresies, which were at the time not heresies, right? But they're like, you know, Jesus is not God. He's just, you know, he's more so human, or you know, you know all the I've kind of forgotten all the technical debates now. And then some say, no, he was just super divine. That was it. There was no human nature to him at all. And they're like, "No, you're both heretics. Like, you're both fully man and fully God." So I'm like, okay, yeah, this is definitely.
You can see at the point, I guess you're thinking, you can see the human fingerprints.
Yes. So continuing on, my last semester, I needed a class. So I was gonna take Greek, and I decided, you know what, I'm not really interested in this anymore. I'm not as motivated to learn languages. So maybe I'll just either do history, you know, and do like maybe just stick to like and then try to pick up Greek and because I already had like a decent foundation for Greek, but still not strong enough to be able to read some of the more, you know, crazier documents. And I thought maybe I could take Latin, but then I took one class to fill in my schedule, and that was philosophy, because I needed another class. And so I said to myself, man, I took philosophy my first semester of school. I didn't really like it, but I needed a class, and I said, all right, I'll just take philosophy. And it was a philosophy of mind class. It was a really interesting class. It was kind of like, you know, what is the mind? As weird as that sounds, you know, abstract, but the whole class was just very, how can I say, it was interesting to me because there was this pursuit of truth. It's like, okay, for 1500, 1600 years, you know, these philosophers have said that the soul is the mind, but now we know, you know, that your mind can go crazy, and you don't have to reference, like there's this, we learned about the case of this guy, I forgot his name, but it's a true story. In the 1800s, this guy, he was working in a railway or in a railroad building.
Spike in his head.
Yes, that's the guy. Remember his name?
I don't remember his name, but I know you're talking about.
I don't remember his name off the top of my head. But anyways, he gets it through his head, and everyone's like, after that, his personality changed. I mean, this guy had a rod up his eyeball through his brain. And he walks into the doctor's office, and the doctor's like, you should be dead, you know? And they're like, yeah, it altered his personality. And so the idea is like, look, this rod didn't pierce his soul. Like, you think the metal can go through the soul, you know?
Right.
I said, yeah, that makes sense. They said it affected his brain. So now we kind of figured out that there's no soulish realm. It's just the brain. It's just the brain is where the mind is. But where do you find the mind in the brain? And I was like, yo, this class is crazy. You know, like I can't believe this is even a subject that I'm sitting down in a classroom learning. And from there, I was hooked. After that, I was hooked.
You felt like you were whether or not you had answers, you were at least getting to the most important questions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it was profound to me. And then the following semester, it was the summer, and I kind of thought to myself, and maybe I should change my major to this. So because I had already transferred and I had already eaten up a year, I had to make up my mind fast, you know? And I decided, all right, you know what? I'll do it. And I think that decision, looking back, really changed my life. I didn't know it at the time. I was just like, yeah, I want to continue studying this.
Yeah.
In the summer, I took ancient Greek philosophy. I started to read Plato. I was floored by Plato. I was floored. I was like, yo, this guy is an unbelievable thinker. You know, I started to read Aristotle, who's, you know, you kind of need coffee to get through Aristotle. Like, you don't need it with Plato, but I feel like with Aristotle, you kind of need it. And yeah, so from there, I started to just really get into thought. You know, like how thought has evolved, because that was, I guess, always underlying all of the subjects I was interested in,
Mm.
but I had never really thought about it. But yeah, it was like the history of thought and learning how thought has shifted throughout time. Like, okay, Plato says truth is here, and this is, how we know that. But then Aristotle says, no, you don't have to reference anything. And I just became fascinated with the debates going on. And that became my goal, was to really just understand all these systems of thought. And I just went for it 100% with philosophy after that. So that's how my journey in philosophy started. So then that summer, I had linked up with some friends. Now not old friends, but like new. I met new people because I was now in a new academic subject. And one of my best friends, he's now he got his PhD recently from North Carolina, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's right now, I think he's teaching I think he's a postdoctorate at Duke or something. He's crazy smart guy, but I knew he was smart when I was talking to him. And I'm like, I kind of want to be friends with this guy. But he was a Catholic. And I thought to myself, like, oh man, if only you knew. No, I'm just kidding. No, so he was a Catholic, and he introduced me to some of his friends. And go figure, by sheer coincidence, a lot of my close friends in my studies now in philosophy were Catholics. Now, the majority of the students at UCLA were not Catholic. I would say, especially in the philosophy department. But that's how I guess, my journey back to Christianity started, was through having friends and being surrounded by people who were already in the faith. When you have intellectual discussion, I know some people might say, yeah, I converted overnight. That wasn't the case for me. I don't believe. I think you have one friend that you do a podcast with, who said his conversion or his deconversion was like an overnight. The guy who you podcast with 3 guys.
Right. So there's Jay Witt, whose face we don't see, then there's Albert.
Yes.
Kim. So Jay Witt.
Kim. No,
Albert.
Kim.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe he said that in the podcast, but I'd want to know the context of how that happened, though. But either way, though, these kinds of intellectual journeys are really like step by step. You have a conversation with someone, and it's not, in my opinion, it's not about winning or losing. It's more just about.
It's about becoming.
Yeah, it's about, like, you reflect on what was said, and you think, like, that's a good point. Maybe I might look that up, or maybe, maybe I should think about that. So, again, coming from it now in a philosophical context, I'm not in a biblical studies department. I'm not in a languages department or a history department. It's philosophical. So they would always kind of, I would talk to my friends about God, and they'd be like, you believe in God? And I'd be like, no, man, I don't believe that. And of course they did, and they would say, like, why not? And I said, well, if you want to ask, and I'd go off, I'd be like, look, you can't trust the Bible, this and that. And they're like, all right, all that's cool, but the question is, do you believe that God exists? It became a very philosophical twist on everything that I had learned. And I said, I don't think we can know that. I think God is just what we call the universe, and our understanding of it is what we call God. That was my position. I actually had one professor who, when I was taking German philosophy, I was learning Hegel. I was studying Hegel. He argued that was Hegel's position. So I just took Hegel's position. I'm like, hey, Hegel said that, God is just a compilation of historical events, and what we perceive to be history, that's what we call God. And they're like, okay, so you're an atheist. I was like, yeah, sure. And then the conversation turned. It was like, we would debate now, does God exist? And to be honest, they were very well versed. Whereas I was looking at it for more, we can't trust this, we can't trust this. They're just like, well, That's cool, but does God exist? You know, and that became a big philosophical question that we would always be debating back and forth, because looking back, and I've thought about this a lot over my intellectual journey. I've thought about this a lot, actually. It's been you're under, I guess, my understanding when I read the Bible, I look at it at the time, I want to say, at the time, I looked at it from a very humanistic lens, because, you know, yes, I was taught documentary hypothesis. Yes, I was taught social criticism. Yeah, all that stuff. But at the root of all that, and Quine, the philosopher, talks about this. He says our beliefs are like a web. You know what I mean? He goes, you know, web, they reach out everywhere. But if you break the center of that web, the whole thing falls apart. The center, the foundation of the web is the most important part. And at my foundation of my web, I'll say it like that, was God does not exist. So God does not exist. It makes sense miracles don't have, it makes sense that my mom didn't get it. It makes sense that, you know, Noah's Ark is just a myth. It makes sense that, you know, but if the web, if the foundation shifts, you know, and I guess that's what they were trying to do. I just didn't think about it, was if you allow the possibility of God's existence or believe that God exists, those things might not change, because you might look. I have a friend who says, yeah, I believe God exists, but there's no way in heck we can know through any revealed text that it's the God of the Bible, or that it's the God of the Quran, or that it's the God of the Muslim, or what, you know. He was just basically that question, does God exist, that became kind of an obsession for me later on, you know, after I would say a year after really, you know, talking to these guys and being their friends. They kind of convinced me of the importance of that question.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So a year before I was set to graduate, I had tried to petition UCLA because I had eaten up already a lot of time there. And I had tried to petition UCLA. I said, can I add a minor? And they said, no, you're done in the winter quarter. That's it. Now it was summertime when I got that rejection. So I said, okay, I got 2 quarters. I know I was going to get my degree in philosophy, and I had 2 quarters left to really enjoy school, to sit down and really just, you know, wrestle with these questions, because once I go out in the real world and I get a job, and I'm going to have less time to research.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, you know, at the time, my friends were like, I was still an atheist, but they were trying to, you know, get me to see, you know, how big of an issue this was. And I said to myself, to be honest, I didn't care if God existed or not. But it would be intellectually irresponsible of me if I didn't at least investigate the issue. So I started to listen to debates, you know, between, you know, William Lane Craig and a whole bunch of other. And I had this job on campus. I worked at the computer school for like 3 years while I was a student there. And I loved it because my job was to just kind of, I didn't work like, you know, as a cashier or anything. I was really like in the back with the deliveries and like stocking the equipment, delivering the equipment all across campus. So most of my time was just spent, I had my headphones in and I would just be like doing my job. And so I would go on YouTube and I would rip the audio, the whole video, I would rip it into MP3 and put it on my iPod. And I would just be like ripping and downloading debates like, does God exist? Does God exist? You know, with William Lane Craig, with all these, listening to all of these academics debate each other, because it was, nothing's as cool as watching this professional in their field and this professional in their field, and they're just clashing, you know. So I started listening to all these debates about, does God exist? Sam Harris, the Sam Harris Craig one at Notre Dame. I don't know if you heard that one.
Yeah.
But those were some classics, man. And I'm listening to all these debates, and I'm taking medieval philosophy. I'm looking at all these medieval thinkers. I'm looking at the ontological argument and the cosmological argument. And then I'm looking at the atheist camp, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, I think the theists have the stronger arguments. Now, I wouldn't say any of them are proof. Like, I would never say to someone, I can prove to you that God exists
Mm-hmm.
through the cosmological argument. Just sit down. I would never say that, but I would say my thought was, which side is more convincing?
Mm-hmm.
To me, it seemed like the theists had the more convincing arguments. The
Okay.
atheists relied a lot, I noticed, on the problem of evil.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, well, even if God doesn't exist, evil's still a big issue. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, here's the one way to put it. I know this is a very crude way to put it, but and it's a horrible example, but it's the first thing that popped into my head right now. But you would hear like Sam Harris, he would go up, he's like, what kind of a God gives these people these crazy diseases and lets babies die.
Right.
And I was thinking to myself, okay, well, if that baby dies, it's still dead, and that sucks. That's horrible. That's a horrible thing. But I guess if you're a Christian on the flip side, you can say, well, now we believe the baby's in heaven. Like that baby's in a better place. The atheist still got the problem to deal with. Like, what? It's still a problem. It doesn't go away. And I thought that too much reliance on the problem of evil, not that I found any of the theistic camp to be super convincing against, but at the end of the day, all I'm trying to say is I found the theistic camp to have the better arguments. And so I thought to myself, well, okay, I'll allow the possibility that God exists. Now, but what does that mean, really? Because I have a friend who he's kind of like a stoic in practice, but he believes, I believe that a God created this universe. He says, I do. But how do you go from there to Jesus Christ? You know what I mean? Like, how do you make that logical leap? I said, that's a good question. I don't know. So, so that was where I was at. I said, okay, I believe. So I told my friend, I said, look, I've investigated the issue. I think it's possible. I'm not saying that I'm going to go read the Bible tomorrow. I'm just saying it's possible. It's possible. That's really where my journey back to Christianity started, was through philosophy. And I don't know if you have any questions that you want to ask.
No, because I think the way that you're telling the story, you're answering the questions that I would have.
Okay.
So you spent about what you said, probably about a year or two between the time that you said, I don't know if this religion is true, to where you begin to say the possibility of God, and then looking more closely at Christianity. How long as an unbeliever did you spend?
I see. Yeah, good question, man. So let me say this. When I was studying, I just remembered this. I left this detail out. When I was studying the Hebrew Bible in community college, I had started to become an unbeliever, but I still went to church because I thought maybe, just maybe, what if this is true? I was I'm not sure. However, the more I studied, like I would say, let me give you a timeline, because I think it would help if I gave you a timeline. Let's say 2009. 2009 was the time when I started to study, like take Hebrew studies seriously. And it was at that point, and I was still going to church because my mom had just died. I kind of needed that, to help me deal with it. 2009 was the time that I started to, like toward the end, my full semester, I started to study Hebrew, the Hebrew Bible academically. And if I'm not mistaken, hopefully I got the timeline right, but I was still going to church, and I would never voice how I read all the stuff I was learning. I would never talk about it to my church friends, because it was like, they would know. They're like, yo, are you becoming an atheist? And especially 2010, once I was like toward the end, getting toward, real, like, into my studies, really into my studies, I was not really going to church anymore. And 2011, I created a Facebook, and I was kind of more vocal about, because, through Facebook, it feels a little impersonal. Like, you
Yeah.
know, the message is going to get to people, but you don't have
Right.
to worry about saying it to
Right.
their face and
Right.
insult them, you know?
Indirect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was, I would say this to give you a definite timeline, 2010, 2011. I thought, you know, maybe Judaism's true, but then I'm like, nah, definitely this whole book is man-made. 2010, 2011 until about 2013. So about 2 years. I would say it
Okay.
was about 2 years. Summer of 2013 is when I started to investigate the question
Mm-hmm.
of, you know, does
Does God
God?
exist? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a 2 year journey for me, at least in this state of, I don't know what the truth
Mm-hmm.
is. I don't believe in God, but I'm still trying to look for truth. So long story short, man, it was around 2013, and I thought to myself, okay, God exists, the possibility of God existing. And then
Mm-hmm.
I thought, okay, what else? What else? How much further can
Mm-hmm.
this go? Because if God exists, there's now possibilities, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
God created the world and he disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
You know, didn't want to have anything to do. He's like, oh, these humans suck, and he just left. So, you know, the deistic worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the, you know, the Christian worldview, which says, you know, God created the heavens and the earth, and he left us his scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the, you know, Judaic world, the same thing. And so I started to think, like, where, you know, how can I in the quickest time kind of figure out the
Mm-hmm.
answer, or at least do my best to figure out
Mm-hmm.
the answer to this question, because I didn't have much time left at UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
So it was fall 2013. And so the question shifted because I realized one thing, and I
Mm-hmm.
realized one important thing, because now that I told my Catholic friends, I believe that God possibly exists, you know, blah, blah, blah. And they said, okay, what do you think about the resurrection of Jesus? And I said, and still remember to this day, man, me and my friend got into such a heated debate about the resurrection, just outside the UCLA library. People must have thought we were some weirdos or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're walking into the library, you're hearing this dude, there's no way Jesus existed. You know, it's like, what are you guys talking about? So I'm sitting there and I'm debating with my friend, you know, and he was, of course, you know, my Catholic friend Alfredo. Shout out to Alfredo, by the way. I doubt he's watching this, but you know, so I'll send this to him either way. But you know, I'm sitting there and I'm debating with him, and he's telling me, like, you know, the disciples witnessed it. Paul, he was a witness, and they're writing this book, and they're witnesses to this event. And I said, look, man, these guys could have hallucinated. They could have. I was listening. Listen, I was listening to everybody. I was listening to Richard Carrier. I was listening to Bill Craig. They had a debate. I listened to that debate, and I brought up some of Richard Carrier's points. I said, look, Richard Carrier says this. Richard Carrier. And he's like, yeah, but this and that. So we were going back and forth. And it was a heated debate. So I left that night, and I was kind of like sad that it ended like that. I'm like, man, I should never let my emotions ever get away, you know, a fruitful debate. But you know, I thought to myself, that's a good question. I need to investigate this further, because he left at a deadlock. And you know, he asked a lot of questions I didn't know the answer to. I said, I'm open-minded, I'll look this up. So I started to listen to debates on the resurrection of Jesus, because this was my thought. Jesus is the key figure to discovering which of these religions got it right, because they all feature Jesus, right? Like the Muslims say Jesus was a prophet. It was made to look as if he was crucified, but he was not crucified. But here's the thing, they still say he's a real figure. He's a real historical figure. He lived here, he walked here, he was a prophet. The Jews say, well, no, the guy was a Messiah type. He was a Messiah type figure, but he proved to be a false Messiah. And history moved on. We didn't dwell on it too much longer after that. And the Christians say, no. Jesus existed. he was pre-existent, but he existed here on earth, space and time, died and resurrected, rose from the dead, the Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, it was like, okay, Jesus is the centerpiece.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought this was my thought. If I could kind of hone in on this question,
mm-hmm.
there's four possibilities. Either Judaism is right and he was a false Messiah, or Islam is right, he was a prophet and he was made to look as if he was crucified, was never crucified, or the Christian narrative is true, or all of them are lies.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the four, right? The Richard Carrier kind of skeptical camp, right? All of them are false, right? And so now I could do a probability. I remember writing this down on a paper. I'm like, okay, there's a 25% chance Christianity is true, 25% chance Islam is true, 25, right? And I'm looking, so I had done some at the time. It wasn't until I got to grad school that I really studied the Eastern religions or the Eastern philosophy. Because when I did my grad work at the University of Oklahoma, that's where I did my grad work at in philosophy. We had this scholar, Amy Olberding, and she's a scholar of Eastern philosophy. And I took a seminar, Confucianism, with her. And one of the first classes I had at TA was a class on Eastern philosophy. And I'm like, I'm out of my element. So I had to quickly read no more than the students about, Buddhism. I read the Dhammapada. On Hinduism, I read some of the Vedic text, I read the Bhagavad Gita. So, it wasn't until then, but at the time I had studied them lightly enough to know that the Eastern religions were very different, man. They were very different. Confucianism doesn't even worry about the question of God's existence. Buddhism says, there are no gods. And Hinduism says there are gods, but they're manifestations of the one substance. You know what I mean? It was very strange to me, and they were very foreign. But Christianity was different in the sense that it roots the truth value in a historical manner. It says this happened in history, and if you can disprove it, you can disprove the whole religion, right? It said St. Paul says it. If Christ did not resurrect, this is all a sham. This is a big sham. And so I said that distinguishes this from all of the other religions. Like you can't know whether or not there's one substance metaphysically, and again, Buddhism and Confucianism don't posit anything. I didn't really think about Shintoism or any of those. Sorry, Shinto people watching. But so I'm sitting there and I said, okay, let's investigate this because this will open up a new can of worms. So I then began to look at people like Gary Habermas. I don't know if you're familiar with Gary Habermas.
Yep.
Yes. He gives the minimal fact. Yes, he gives the minimal fact. And I listened. I remember I was listening to a whole lot. So I was downloading a new set of debates. It was like, did Jesus resurrect from the dead? A lot of them featuring Bill Craig. Is the resurrection a historic? There was a good debate. Unfortunately, it was a bit too emotional. It got really heated between, I think, Bart Ehrman and Bill Craig. And, they debate, is the resurrection of God, I forgot the topic, but it was something like, is the resurrection of Jesus a plausible historical event or something? And what I was realizing at the time was they're talking past each other because Bill Craig, he believes in God. And Bart Ehrman says, I don't believe in God. That's not a way you do history. You don't look at the supernatural events and say like, yeah, no, it definitely happened. So they're like different world. And I was thinking about that web again. I'm like, yeah, their webs are different. Their foundations, they're not going to agree on this. So because my web again had allowed for the possibility that God existed, I said, maybe this could have happened. That was my thought. I became open to it. And I'm listening to Gary Habermas. And Gary Habermas has an interesting testimony because he says, I was gonna be a Buddhist. He's like, I was gonna be a Buddhist. And he's like, some days I was. It's funny that he says that. I had to actually, because that I guess how can I say, that was, I guess, a very crucial testimony for me, that I had to go back and listen to it like just this week, because I'm like, I had to remember, like, what was it that I was listening to? And Gary Habermas mentions that. He's like, yeah, I was gonna be a Buddhist. And I'm like, no wonder I related to this guy. We were kind of like the same boat, because I didn't know what I was gonna do. I was just, still a skeptic. And so Gary Habermas gives, his minimal facts argument. And to me, it started to hinge on, the minimal facts themselves, or historical premises. Like, one of the minimal facts is that Jesus was crucified. And so I started to look, okay, was he crucified? Because the Muslims say he wasn't. So if that right there, that historical event can literally distinguish which religion could be true and which one could be false. Because if your holy text, because remember, if the Quran is supposed to be the literal word of God as spoken to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel, I believe it was Gabriel, then, I mean, God's got to get his history right, man. You know what I mean? So if he's saying, yeah, no, Jesus wasn't crucified,
right.
The other text says, no, he was. I was like, okay, now we're getting to the questions that I want to have answered, which is, can we verify this historically? Now that opens up a whole can of worms that I didn't really investigate until much later, which is like, your philosophy of history, which document. And you mentioned this. You mentioned in the very beginning, I have it written right here, trust issues. Trust text. So I would like to pause, because I think this is a good time to bring this up. I'll pause my story and I'll just ask you. So you, I guess, started and you had this issue with trusting the scriptures. Now, what led to, I guess, these trust issues, or what made you develop these, trust issues?
So you said a minute ago, whatever God is going to take claim for giving divine revelation, the God's got to get its history right.
Agreed.
And of course, like you said, you get into things like historiography and what's your philosophy of history and all that.
Agreed.
But it also gets into epistemology.
Agreed.
Like, how do we know what's true? And I'm partial to the view of epistemology that looks for coherence, that looks for, do your claims represent or reflect reality? If there's no coherence between your claim and reality, I have a hard time accepting that as truth.
Okay.
When it comes to things like the resurrection, I don't know, because it's in the past, and because there are no camcorders or DNA to prove who was Jesus, and this was really him on that cross, and there really are no ways to confirm the resurrection. It's really just a matter of, do you take the word of the person who's reporting it? But that wasn't really a problem for me. The problem was when I was in seminary. This is why people think it's an intellectual issue with me. In seminary, I had professors who were giving us this latitude on how we interpret Genesis. Things that I had heard before, but I was not expecting to hear it from this institution. I'm like, why are you guys doing this? Like, it's okay with, for them to do it out there, but why are you? I came here to learn to do apologetics because I'm going into secular academia. Why are you all taking this route where you're giving Genesis this wide range of how it can be interpreted? Yeah. And even though I had done Bible college prior, now I'm in seminary at the grad level. And I'm like, man, this is not what I signed up for. But come to find out, there were two things. One was the way ancient Near Eastern creation stories functioned. That was sort of becoming, this is, go back about 10, 12 years now. But within the last 20 years, Christian Old Testament scholars have been doing a lot of kind of backpedaling to kind of take into account, the the way these creation texts functioned in that culture was not the way that we've been taking them.
Okay.
And not only that, but the Genesis accounts sort of really show how much they're borrowing from, or at least speaking to, the common traditions at the time. So it's almost like the best you could say about the Genesis text is it's polemic. It's using the same motifs to make a counter argument. Which,
okay, sure.
Yeah, if you're going to use the same motif to make a counter argument, cool. But what you're also doing is you're acknowledging that this motif is not original.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you get history from it? If you're just going to tell a very similar story and change details to make a different point about either God's sovereignty or God's separation from his creation, okay, I get your point. But you're using the same story. And I thought that story was history. Now I've got to wrestle with that. So on one hand, it was the ancient Near Eastern stories that were being surfaced and forcing Old Testament scholars to change the way that they're looking at the text. And then on the other hand, it was science, it's evolution. And so Christian theologians are beginning to have this wide interpretation of Genesis to make room in Eden for evolution. And not just the age of the earth, but whether or not Adam and Eve were the original parents of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking, okay, I see what you're doing, but as an evangelist for 30 years, I know why you're doing it. You're doing it because when you get to the New Testament, Paul ties his doctrine of sin into what happened in the garden. Mm-hmm. And if that's not literal, and if that's not historical, then what the blank is Paul talking about? And so I just remember sitting there saying, okay, I see the, it began to seem like games. Like, we're going to play this game of what can't we say anymore because of science? Okay, then what are we going to now say? And I remember just sitting there saying, I don't want to play that game. I'm not going to, back when I was a kid, right? I remember when Nintendo started battling with Sega Genesis and they started making, and all these, like there was always new games and who can make, oh, now this has 32 bits. This one has 64 bits. This one has 120. I remember saying, I can't keep up. One, I grew up poor. I can't keep buying all these new games. But two, now it looks like I'm going to have to keep buying game systems to keep up. And I remember I bowed out of the video game. I love video games. I bowed out because I'm like, I can't keep up. I can't keep getting game systems. I felt the same way in seminary. I felt like, okay, you're telling me this is true, but the way I'm going to justify that it's true, the apologetics I have to do to call it truth, it's going to keep changing every time science says something new, every time we find some new fact about the ancient world. And I just remember saying, I don't want to play that game. I didn't sign up for that. If this is not truth, and if I can't trust the divine author to be a truth teller, because by the time once you start looking at things like you talked about with John J. Collins, and once you start looking at, okay, well, I can't take this literally, or I can't take that to the bank, or I got to do this here. At some point you end up saying, okay, then the God who raised Jesus from the dead, the track record for believing that he was able to do that. You talk about your web of beliefs, right? You've got a God at the center, but the reason you trust this God is because he did all these things in the past. So that by the time you get to Jesus, well, of course he can do this because he parted the Red Sea and he did it.
Right.
If you take those things away, I get to Jesus and I'm like, wait, I'm supposed to believe that this God who didn't do those things resurrected Jesus?
Right.
I can't. I don't know if that sounds to people like, well, it is an intellectual issue. For me, it's not. It's a relational issue. I don't know how to trust someone who I have to keep coming up with ways to defend. Like I always say, it feels like being the press secretary for Donald Trump. Like every day there's a new thing you've got to defend. I didn't sign up for that, and I don't know how to wake up in the morning feeling good about what I've told people for 30 years When in my mind and in my heart, I'm like, ooh, I may have to go back and tell them that's not how it goes. So that's why I say it's trust issues for me.
Yeah, that's a logical thought too. That is a very logical thought. Like, yo, if this isn't original, if this is just like its neighbors, its nearest or neighbors, then I mean, maybe there was some, there was some what's the word plagiarism going on. I don't want to say plagiarism, but
we know it's not plagiarism because that's the way that they spoke to each other. Like what Old Testament scholars will tell you is critical and the people get mad when I say this, but the honest evangelical ones, they'll look at that and they'll say it's not necessarily plagiarism. It was acceptable to take the same story and put your twist on it to make your point about your God. This is what they did.
Can I ask you a question? I don't know if you would know the answer to this, but did were your professors believers? Did they have to sign?
Oh yeah. Well, and here's the interesting thing. Okay. Many of my favorite professors no longer teach at the seminary because of these issues. But I went to Westminster Theological Seminary, which is like it's the Harvard of Christian seminaries.
Yeah.
But so when I talked about evolution, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Peter Enns.
No.
So Peter Enns was a Westminster professor. He left the school about 5 years before I got there. But he wrote a book called The Evolution of Adam. And I read that book for one of my Old Testament classes. It wasn't assigned. It was in a list of books that you could read and critique.
Okay.
And I read it to critique it. And as a believer, I critiqued it harshly. Because what he did was he basically said, we know enough about genetics, about the human origins now that we can't deny evolution. So what he said was, okay, Adam and Eve are not literal or historical. So Paul was wrong about that. But we still need the cross because we can see that man is still sinful. So I'm sitting there like, wait, how do you say Paul was wrong about that, but then still try to say we need the cross? If that's not true, it all falls apart. So I tore his book to shreds and bragged about it to my Hebrews language professor. You'll appreciate this. You're a Hebrew guy. So I bragged about, dissing Peter Enns in this paper. And the only response he had was, well, first he said, pizza, dear friend. We just had dinner last night. I'm like, maybe I should have asked if he was still cool with him before I dissed him.
Yeah.
But then he said, these are the books that he read that influenced him to think the way that he thinks about evolution. And it wasn't until later that night that I said, wait, you didn't say he was wrong. Like, why didn't you say, good job, Brady? Like, yeah, he was wrong. Evolution's not true. All of our apologists who keep telling us that we don't have to. You didn't say any of that. You just said these. And I realized he couldn't say what he probably wanted to say because he would get fired too. Right. So I just stored that up as, okay, late when you graduate, go research that. Anyway, I just say that to say they were believers, but they were in their own small ways becoming liberal theologians because they just knew there were certain things that you couldn't take people would say, I wanted them to be fundamentalist. Maybe I did, but what I wanted was to have a trustworthy text. Yeah. So, but they were believers. They just were becoming more liberal. Long answer to your question.
No, that's actually a really good answer because I remember when you were on Myth Vision, you had one. I mean, you did mention, your whole is the Bible, infallible or is it inerrant? Yes. And I remember you said one of the things after that experience was you said your professors, I think I'm quoting you directly. You said, my professor is bending over backwards for evolution. I remember. So you said that.
Yeah.
Then you didn't mention it again. I said, whoa.
Right.
So yeah, evolutionary theory. I'm very curious. So your professor said, okay, Genesis is true, but we got to now reconcile this with evolution, and that to you was like, yo, this is too much.
So none of my professors were saying that. Peter Enns said that in his book, and the school had let him go years before I got there.
I see.
But the professors that I did have, one of them in particular, he just was making just this wide, there was just a lot of latitude for how you could take Genesis. He never mentioned evolution. He just was getting around things like, why is the sun created? Why is light created before the sun? And what does it mean for God to create the world in Genesis 1, chapter 1, but then the world have no form or function in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2? And so he's just challenging, like, are there ways that we can look at it that aren't so wooden literally? Never endorsed evolution, never mentioned it. Peter Enns did. And I think, I wasn't with that until my other Hebrews professor said, well, he has some points, but never under the banner of the school did any of them say evolution is true.
So there seems to be a theme here, if I'm catching on, which is these are stories, not true history.
Right. Well, and I think my professors would say they can be historical without being literal. So they make this divide here. It's not literal in terms of this is what happened play by play, but there could be history underneath it, almost like a poem can have history, but it's a poetic version of the history. So you're going to have some hyperbole. You're going to have some metaphorical things talking about real events, just not literally.
So kind of like Homer in a way, because Homer's kind of like that. He's referring to this war,
right?
Between the Trojans and the Greeks, and you might think, well, and then they excavate Troy, and they're like, hey, this is a real war, but maybe it just didn't go down the way he said it.
Yeah, there's many ways you could take it, not literally but historically, and the answers to how you do that are as various as there are people. But what people like William Lane Craig wrote a book about this very issue. The book is called The Quest for the Historical Adam.
Yes, I've been wanting to read it.
Yeah. It sickened me, to be honest. It sickened me because while my professors were not bending over backwards to make room for evolution, the scholars that I ended up going to get answers, they were bending over backwards, and William Lane Craig is one. Once you become convinced of the science behind evolution, you end up having to do things. And one of the things that Craig says is we're sort of painted into a corner by what the New Testament says. Yeah. And so even the New Testament, even some of Paul's writings, there are ways that you can make them non-literal so that we can actually mesh it with what we now know via science. But then there are other things that we can't do that with. And so we kind of just have to hold those things as irreconcilable and incompatible as they are. If we cannot get around them because the Bible kind of just it ties us to them, we sort of have to hold those as antinomies and just trust that God will show us how they fit together later because we can't do it now.
Can I ask you, because I'm going to read the book either way. I hope I'm not like asking you for spoilers or anything. But what is his position on evolution? Does he believe it or not?
Yes. Yeah. So he has a friend named Joshua Swamidass. So both him and Joshua Swamidass, Josh wrote a book called The Genealogical Adam and Eve. So they wrote their separate books. And then I think they're going to write a book together about ways to make sense of the New Testament's use of Adam and Eve in light of what we now know. Joshua Swamidass is a computational geneticist or computational scientist, something like that. It's a scientist who convinced William Lane Craig that he needed to take evolution serious. And William Lane Craig, and he kind of went through the same thing I went through. He ended up still in the faith. Went through about 2 years of like not knowing how it was going to work out because, like he says, Jesus seems to believe in a historical Adam and Eve. but that's hard to do when you look at the science. So yeah, he assents to evolution. Once you understand the science behind it, you almost can't at this point. And when I say almost, I'm just trying to be gracious because I know there are very many people who believe the jury is still out on evolution, and that we don't. There's a book. What is it? Adam and the Genome.
Okay.
Adam and the Genome.
Okay.
The first half is written by a Christian geneticist. The second half is written by an evangelical pastor. The pastor is there to do pastoral care because the first half of the book, if you assent to this guy's not making this stuff up, there are Christians in the sciences who will tell you this is true. Like we know enough now to say all the evidence points to evolution, and not evolution from two people, evolution from a population of people.
Did you ever read? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Did you ever read maybe a thinker who argued against it and said, "No, evolution is not true"? Was that any required reading, or was all the required reading from your college?
So no one in my seminary assigned me a text on evolution at all. One professor who, all this is post. Everything that I'm talking about, what I read was post seminary.
I see.
I graduated in 2015. I didn't start doing this research until 2021.
I see now.
I spent 6 years in between seminary and doing my research, 6 years in depression and doubt, because I knew at some point, even though I dissed Peter Enns when I read his book, at some point I remember sitting in class saying, damn, it would make sense though. Like, not only would it make sense, it would also explain why there's so many things in the Old Testament that just don't pan out. Where did Cain and Abel get their wives? Stuff like that. Just all kinds of things. Like, it's like, damn, if something else is true, it would explain why we have to keep coming up with ways to answer these things that are just doesn't make sense. And so I remember like somewhere 2014, 2015, I felt the foundation of my faith crack, where I just said, this probably is not true. And as soon as I thought it, I said, shut up. Like, don't think those thoughts, don't allow yourself to. And I just began to try to patch that crack up with whatever I could for the next 6 years. And at some point, the doubt, the depression, it ate away at me. I mean, I went from trying to be pious to get God to show up to just outright sin. Like, just I'm gonna do whatever I can to make God say, I don't care if he has to judge me, convict me, do something to show me that I should still believe this. Mm-hmm. After 6 years of that, in 2021, I said, okay, like you, I said, okay, then now I need to go ahead and research this, because nothing that I'm doing is making God show up. I'm still going to church, still serving, still giving, but struggling.
Yeah.
And in 2021, I said, okay, now I need to do research. I went and just bought every book I could on the subject, from Christians and non-Christians. So that reading William Lane Craig, reading Josh Ramadas, reading C. John Collins, very many Christian sources with a lot of secular sources as well, trying to figure out how to make sense of all this. So yeah, I probably left that out in my initial video because I didn't want to say more than I could at the time in my initial video, because I was still writing my own book and doing my own research.
Yeah, I didn't know. Let me just say this. I didn't know you had a book until it was this week. Was it
okay?
It must have been like Sunday or something. But I had read up on the cross movement. I'm like, what are these guys up to? Because it was curiosity. I haven't heard them drop an album in a long time. So Yeah, and then so I somehow stumbled upon like, yeah, a member of the cross movement renounces his faith. I was like, wait, what? I had to go. I
Wow.
was on YouTube and I'm typing up fanatic cross movement, and that's how I came across your initial video, the backyard, and then your interview with Myth Vision, and then I'm looking up, I'm like, okay, this guy's got a book, so I ordered your book. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Yeah.
But I ordered your book, and so yeah, I'm very new, like what's going on, and I just really this whole week has just been me in my spare time on YouTube looking up, ambassadors' response to you.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this like, my gosh, I can't believe all of it.
It's crazy, right? Yeah, it's crazy. And there's some things that I can't say, because I don't want to cause other people to stumble. But in terms of where I've been and where I've gone, like I'm not fanatic at this point. Like I'm a different dude. Like I live a different life. My Christian friends would not approve.
Let me say something. Let me say just a couple things. I have some more follow-up questions from what you just mentioned. But number one, I guess my number one question is, did you, when you were, trying to get through these questions, did you go to some of the members of the cross movement and say like, hey man, I'm dealing with this, or what do you think? Because Ambassador, for example, and I'm just going to be honest here, I look up to him because he's a very intelligent man. Like listen, nobody names their rap album Christology. Unless they're an academic.
Yeah.
So I said, nah, this dude, and I'm looking at his gone to school, did the education. I'm like, I wonder if I'll just say Brady now. I was gonna say Fanatic.
Yeah.
I wonder if Brady ever reached out to Ambassador and said, hey man, you're a wise man. Could you help me through these issues? Or, because in my case, one of the things I mentioned earlier in my story was how influential for me it was to have, because I guess had I been surrounded by nothing but atheist friends who thought alike, I guess I would have never really thought about it. But because I had a lot of Catholic friends and we were philosophers, seeking truth, we were always debating these issues, and they put that seed in my mind, like, okay, what if I'm wrong? What if I need to do some more research? Did you have that? Or, so I guess it's a twofold question.
Yeah. So not really, because when I graduated seminary, I told the people who were close to me, I think I was ashamed, because I'm fanatic, right? How can I be this dude, 7 albums with the cross movement, 4 solo albums, spent 30 years, and then come out talking about I'm struggling with my faith. I think I didn't want to be a casualty of seminary. I didn't want to be you hear the stories, right? But on top of that, I also didn't want to cause anyone else to stumble. So I'm like, and here's what I did. So when I graduated seminary, I made a sort of a pact with God. I said, I can't see you in your word right now. I need to see you in your world. I have a biblical worldview. I interpret things through the grid of scripture anyway, but I just can't read the Bible right now. If I see one more thing in the text that doesn't add up, I don't know what's going to happen to me. And so I graduated seminary looking for God in his world, just trying to interpret things in God's favor. Any coincidence, any favorable, anything that was too good to be true, that was God. And for the first, but I told the people close, I had an accountability group. I told them I was dating a Christian woman. I told her, and they were worried, but called, like, okay, but you need to get back to the Bible at some point. But as I got deeper in my depression, I had ways that I would confess my struggles to people, but I always tried to do it in Christianese, in ways that didn't kind of, alert people to the code red danger that was going on underneath the surface. So it wasn't until 2021 when I started doing my research, because I almost didn't really know how to name the problem.
Mhm.
Like when I came out of seminary, it was almost like there was so much. It was the New Testament's use of the Old Testament. It was source criticism. It was textual criticism. It was Genesis. There was so much. I just was like, I don't even know where to begin. It wasn't until 2021 that I began to get a handle on it, that I began to, tell some of the guys in Crossroom, like, yo, it's not looking good. Here's what's going on. And so I did reach out to Ambassador midway through 2021. But by that point, I was already on my way to deconversion. I probably had already deconverted. I just didn't know how to discuss it at that point. And so, that was the process. And I have one friend who was actually quite mad at me for not letting them know what was going on. And I'm like, I'm almost glad I didn't. This is probably opposite of yours. I'm almost glad I didn't let them know what was going on, because I think if I did, they would have talked me back into the faith. And I would have, for the sake of community, buried my doubt and skepticism, as opposed to following the evidence where it led. So that's a very different journey, I guess.
Let me just say one thing I immediately wanted to say off the bat is I totally understand, man, because that's a lot of pressure. I mean, that is like you are, I will, for example, I'll give you an example. I told my sister, I said, hey, you remember Fanatic from the Cross Movement? She said, yeah, I do. She's like, what's up with him? I said, yeah. So, and I just basically told her, like, yeah, he renounced his faith, and I'm gonna be on this podcast, and I'm just gonna talk about my intellectual journey, and I guess make it kind of biographical. And she's like, wait. Like, let's do like what? She literally said, I'm floored. Like, she was shocked. Like, I guess a lot of people, when I saw, I think it was Tonic or True Life, one of them, went on posted his video on YouTube and said, a lot of people are shocked, or are very, they're kind of shaken by what happened.
That was Tonic.
Yeah, and so I don't blame you for keeping it to yourself, because I understand, like, someone with a high profile in the Christian community can't just come out and say, like, that I'm wrestling with these issues. You gotta kind of keep it, kind of keep it to yourself. So I completely understand that, man. That's a difficult situation to be in.
And I'd have professors like, so one of my professors in seminary, I didn't realize how fundamentalist the institution was, but I remember writing a paper on, people always talk about the similarity in the DNA between humans and chimpanzees.
Yeah.
And one of the responses from the evangelical, especially, the apologists, is it could be one or two things. We could have a common ancestor with chimpanzees, or we have a common designer. And so the design is going to look similar. Just like you could find, a Buick and an Oldsmobile, or a Ford and a Mercury, right? Same designer. So similar design doesn't mean same car. And so I remember writing a paper for one of my professors. He's the science guy at Westminster. I remember writing a paper on evolution, talking about why the similarities between human and chimpanzee DNA does not mean we have a common ancestor. And I got an A on the paper, and he had written books, on the same subject, just about basically just debunking evolution. And so I knew most of my Christian community, if I were to share with them the things I was struggling with, they would probably point me to people who were going to give me more of the same. And I was sniffing out, I don't think that's it. I don't think those answers are right. And so part of it, it's multifaceted. Another part of me not wanting to share with people before I was able to do the research was, you're going to point me back in the direction that I feel like this is trending away from. and I didn't want any more obfuscation. I didn't want any more detours in where it seemed like things were headed. Until I was really ready to make that journey. I just felt like suck it up, grin and bear it, give God a chance to speak for himself. Because going to other people at this point was more of the same. I needed God to step up and show me himself if he was ever going to do it.
So, okay, just to clarify,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, sorry, I ask a lot of questions.
No, it's all good.
Yeah. So for the first part, you said you wrote this paper kind of trying to debunk evolution, or trying to, not debunk it, but just show like, yo, there can be other explanations.
Right, exactly.
And then you ended up, so you said like, no, I just kind of dismissed it. What made you say, yeah, no, this is not true. I wrote this paper, but I don't believe it?
Because I kept running into, so I did this like experiment, this thought experiment.
Okay.
Said, I don't believe evolution.
Uh-huh.
I'm surprised that a former Westminster professor did.
Yeah.
But at some point, it was two things. One, I said, it would explain a lot if it was true. That was a little scary. But like you, in a quest for truth, it wasn't totally scary, because like, well, if something else is true, I would like to know what that is. But here was the thought experiment. I said, okay, let me go through the rest of my time here at seminary with two minds. One mind is going to accept everything I'm getting. I'll store it up and say, oh, okay, good, got you. The other mind is going to say, if evolution was true, what would I find in the text, the biblical text? I would find inconsistencies. I would find non sequiturs. I would find things that a past generation would not have known about how the natural world works, but we now know better. I would find those. And then I began to find those things. And it just made me say, like, I don't know what to do with this other than to say, this just doesn't look good for the Bible. And so even though it took me several years to come around and accept it, there was a part of me that just said, this is probably true, right? Like it makes more sense than what you spent 30 years going around telling people. This makes more sense. And even though I didn't know the mechanisms, I hadn't read Darwin's, Origins of Species. I hadn't read Adam and the Genome, none of the books I would later read. It was just it would make sense on its own terms, and then it would make sense of the phenomenon of Scripture. Like, if a God did not reveal divine or inerrant truth, it would explain the discrepancies, the contradictions, the history of religion. So you talked about, the Eastern religions, or at least you talked about the Abrahamic religions and how they developed. Then you talk about the Eastern religions. But the idea that we have so many different religions, to me, would be explained by no divine revelation in the first place. If a God was going to reveal itself, mm-hmm. and wanted to be known, would this splintered effect be the result of a cause of a God who really wanted to reveal himself to people? Like it didn't add up after a while. It seemed much more human than divine, no matter how I tried to spin it.
Yeah.
And that's what scared me. That's what made me say, there were days I would wake up and I couldn't get out of bed. I was so depressed because I was sitting there like, my entire world just seemed like a lie at that point.
Yeah.
And this went on for several years.
Yeah.
After seminary. Yeah.
Yeah. So to sum up the main part is either evolution is true or Genesis is true. a historical fact. Like there was this
Mm.
garden, and there was a man and a first woman, and God did it the way it said, but it can't be this weird hybrid. It's got to
Well,
be.
there are people who try to make it this weird hybrid.
Yeah,
So you have theistic evolutionists,
for sure.
you
Yeah,
have liberal Christians, you have people who take the polemic approach where Genesis is true, but not literally. It's true in the sense of what it's trying to teach. It's trying to teach that there's just one God, not many gods. It's trying to teach that at the beginning, something, but we don't know what, happened between God and humanity that caused a rift. So it's not literal, but it's historical. So there are ways that you can get it together. The only problem is when you get to the New Testament doesn't do any of that hybrid kind of stuff. The New Testament teaches it as this happened. Through one man, sin came into the world, and all this.
that is very true.
So it was like the hybrid liberal stuff, I was too much of a Bible believer to do that to the Bible. Like it was because I believed in the Bible that I couldn't do that to it. Yeah.
You know that now when you put it like that, that makes complete and total sense, because you're right. And I just thought about that myself. You're right. If these New Testament authors are going, especially Paul, Paul references Adam a lot, Eve a lot, he didn't see this as like, yeah, this is some, biological evolutionary, like he thought, no, this really happened. This is a true story. This really happened. And if you kind of break that foundation up, what the rest isn't going to hold. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, that's a logical thought to have, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so that helps me out a lot. Okay, that answered a lot.
Yeah, and you got the book. So if you whenever you get time, if you go through the book, I wrote it in a way that takes people through, like, it's the way that it hit me. What did I have to contend with first, second, third, fourth? I get into the ancient Near Eastern literature and what was really happening in the Old Testament, as opposed to the way Paul saw it and the way we often teach it today. It just becomes difficult to hold that anymore. Yeah, so if you ever get a chance, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, especially from where you are intellectually with things. But so when I say for me, it wasn't intellectual, it was more of a trust issue. Does it make sense that way? Because I resist that when people say, oh, you just want God to make sense to you intellectually. For me, it wasn't an intellectual thing, though it included intellectualism. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, I would just say intellectual topics of the sort. But I get what you're saying, though. It ultimately comes down to, can you trust this document?
Right.
Because you had, and I understand why you're waking up depressed during this time period of your life, because, I mean, you have part of a Christian rap group. I mean, that's how I know
Right.
you. That's your MO is I'm preaching the gospel through this music. It's like your identity, your whole identity is being shut down. So I completely understand. The other thing I was going to mention, though, was, what was I going to mention? Actually, I had it in my head. I actually forgot it, man.
Was it about me kind of keeping it to myself for several years?
No.
Sorry.
No, it's not your fault. It's my fault. I had it in my head. It's all right. Maybe it'll come to me. But okay, so I guess I could, at this point now, if you want, I could proceed.
Yes.
And I think this would be a good point. So going back to that, it's kind of ironic. Listening to that debate with Carrier and Craig. Now I haven't heard this debate in probably 8 years or something, but Carrier mentions, that a lot of at least when he debates with Craig, I haven't really fleshed out Carrier's views in detail, so I'm not sure. Hopefully I don't botch his views, but he kind of says, all these people, Barabbas means, this, and clearly it was meant to be
son of the Father and all that. Yeah.
So he's like, yeah, this is clearly allegory. And then Craig comes up and he's like, no, this is, this historian says that Luke is a genuine historian. Luke is writing in the same way that the other ancient historians of the past have written. There's no reason to doubt the historicity of Luke and et cetera. So they're going back and forth. I'm trying to figure out this question, like, is it plausible that Jesus resurrected from the dead? Because again, going back to that thing, it was like, okay, the crucifixion, right? It's like it can distinguish between Christianity and Islam. And although even like, for example, let's just assume Jesus was a historical figure who was crucified. Let's just assume, right? It would mean that Christianity is true, Islam is false, Judaism could still be true. But it could still be true in the sense that what if the disciples took the body, hid it, started this movement, then he didn't resurrect. He was a failed Messiah, but his disciples made it seem as if he wasn't, right? So I'm thinking about this logically.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, there's a bunch of different ways this can go. But I don't want to get all, crazy with the details. But long story short, I'm hearing all these debates and I'm starting to think, and I look at Habermas's debate. Not debate, it wasn't a debate, it was just a discussion. He just gave his minimal facts. And so he's giving his minimal facts and he says, look, these facts are not debated really by scholars. Like we kind of just
now real quick, are you aware that he he's actually reduced his minimal facts recently because it's got to the point where scholars are like, well, we don't agree on that anymore. Now we know he's been limiting his minimal facts list.
Okay, then for sure I got the outdated version because the one I heard was back in 2011.
He had like 5 back then, right? Was it like 5?
I don't remember. The way I remembered it was 5.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe it's even less now. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I was going through and he goes through his minimal facts, the crucifixion of Jesus, the empty tomb, the fact that skeptics were converted, despite what people might think about St. Paul, whether they think he is a liar or whether they think, he says, I persecuted the church. I'm doing this now, and this is how I received my gospel, and So, and I said, okay, I mean, it's the movement that blew up, the Christian movement that blew up, that people were willing to die for the faith. And I was like, like if I was gonna start some grand conspiracy, and people like I knew it was a lie. Right. And people were like, yo, but you got to be willing to die for this. I feel like, nah, probably not, man.
Unless you're Trump. Unless you're President Trump.
Okay. That's another way you can think about it.
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sitting there and I'm listening to all these debates, and Habermas. And I'm like, yo, what if this guy did resurrect from the dead? What if he did? What if he did? And eventually, long story short, I came to accept it, but it didn't happen overnight. You know what I mean? I was also, because I was interested, and I forgot to mention this too, I was interested, in systems of thought. And I learned about this scholar by the name of Frederick Copleston. I don't know if you've heard of Frederick Copleston. No. He writes what I think to this day is still the most influential history of Western philosophy. And he basically tracks the history of Western philosophy from the pre-Socratics all the way down to the people in his day, like Bertrand Russell. I mean, each book is like 400, 500 pages. It's got like 11 volumes. And I'm like, this man knew literally everything about every philosopher. But here's the interesting thing. He was a Catholic priest. And I'm like, this guy, and I read his biography, this guy still believed in Jesus to the end of his day. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting, man. This dude has 100 times the knowledge I do in
Mhm.
philosophy, still believes in Jesus. So, and then I'm starting, to surround myself with intellectuals at school, and I start to hear all these, intellectuals give their, arguments in favor of God's existence. And I guess what I'm trying to get at, I guess, throughout this experience, me
Mhm.
fleshing it out, is yes, it was a combination of intellectual, like, no, because I don't want to believe something that's a lie.
Mhm.
I want to be in the truth. I want to know the truth. But at the same time, it was a combination of that plus having, I guess, people to help me get there along. I want to say
Mhm.
mentor me because I look at I've never met Frederick Coppelson.
Mhm.
I've never met Bill Craig. I've never met
Mhm.
a lot of these guys, but they helped me to get from point A to point B in my journey. And then from
Mhm.
point Habermas helped me to get from point B to point C.
Mhm.
And to me, they're like intellectual mentors, even though I never met them,
Yeah.
And so they became, and they're the way they thought became very influential. I realized C.S. Lewis was another one.
I was about to say, it seems like C.S. Lewis is going to be next on your list.
Yes, I was, and it's funny because I had read like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in middle school. I
Mhm.
didn't think much of it because I didn't really. It was a cool book, but I didn't think much of it.
Mhm.
But it wasn't until much later I read his biography. I read
Mhm.
this book called The Inklings.
Okay.
It was a biography of Lewis, Tolkien,
Mhm.
Barfield, and I think Williams. And yeah, just like their intellectual journey, and
Mhm.
that's how CS. It was weird listening to C.S. Lewis's biography because I'm like, dang, this sounds just like me.
Mhm.
He lost his mom. He
Mhm.
slipped into atheism, and then Tolkien helped them to get out of it. And I'm like, that's so weird, man.
Yeah,
Like we
yeah.
have like a very similar journey. It's so
Mhm.
weird. So yeah, so all these guys really helped me, I guess, get out of my skepticism, straight atheism to
Mhm.
okay, maybe it's true to,
Mhm.
I think I actually believe this now.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of, the
Yeah.
long story short of how that
No, that's
happened.
good. Yeah.
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 Um, so I continue. I did now. It's not like, and here's the thing. It's not like I had this moment of, oh my God, I woke up and I'm a
Mhm.
Christian now. I'm gonna start going to church. Time to tithe again. No, no, no. I was I was just thinking to myself like, okay, let me keep reading. Let me
Mhm.
keep reading. Let me keep research. I'm not gonna stop. I was always hungry for truth.
Yeah.
It was weird because like I got my first, because I worked at the computer store for so long. My first job out of college was for this IT company, and I didn't really do any of the work on the computer. Still, I was more like admin, but I
Mhm.
was familiar with computers and systems and all that. So I got this job, and I didn't stop the habit of like plugging in my iPod and still like as I was doing work, just listening to all the debates and trying to
Mhm.
figure out like all this stuff. So long story short, a couple years go by. I'm just gonna skip some years that were really not that important. A couple years go by, and I go into grad school. So I'm back
Mhm.
in grad school, and I was still a Christian, but I wasn't going to church actively yet.
Mhm.
I hadn't gone to church really in like 2 years
Mhm.
from the time that I said, okay, I'm starting to believe now Jesus resurrected from the dead. Wasn't going to church.
Mhm.
I would pray from time to time, but it wasn't like
I'm
super.
sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just curious. Were
Yeah.
your Catholic friends aware and excited that you had went from God's a possibility to, hey, I think the arguments for Jesus' resurrection are convincing?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, man.
Mhm.
I skipped over that. Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. So just like Tolkien was disappointed that Lewis didn't become a Catholic, a lot of my and let me tell you this. Let me tell you, I almost did. I
Mm,
almost did become I was very close. I was very
mm,
close. And it happened for some reason. I could not
mm,
do it. I felt like I
mm,
guess maybe it was a philosopher in me that said, I still got to research this. I had another thought, which was also a very revolutionary thought. I'm like, okay, I've accepted, and you did a lot more research on evolution and the historicity. I still wasn't there yet. I was still dealing with this basic issue of, okay, Jesus resurrected. So I'm still coming off of, I believe this, but I'm not going to dive too crazy into the literature because I had this thought to myself, and it was kind of a sad thought, but it's the truth. I said to myself, I was a Christian the majority of my life, still the majority of my life. And I've come back to the faith, but I've never read the Bible. Like I never read the Bible, and it was true. I had never, like, from start to finish, I've never read it. If you were to ask me who the first king of Israel was in 2016, I'd be like, I don't know, David or something. I wouldn't know. So I thought, man, I need to read the Bible. Like and Kierkegaard had this thought. Kierkegaard was sitting outside one day thinking to himself, Christianity shouldn't be easy. Like, it should be difficult, like, because I guess he didn't like the state of the church in his day. And he's like, too many Christians who say they're Christians, but I mean, you can't tell, you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing. So I thought to myself, I should at least sacrifice some time to read the scripture, get through the scriptures in a year. And ironically, it's not this version that I read first, but I'm starting to get in the habit of reading the 1 year Bible.
Okay.
Which, gets you through the Bible in a year. And so that was my first experience. I read the 1 year Bible, the New Living Translation of it. And I was like, wow, I didn't know a lot of this was in here. But one thing I couldn't get past though was, since the beginning, this has been, the God of the Bible is a God of the miraculous. Like even the act of creating everything from the very beginning, you know what I mean, to getting Moses to split the Red Sea, the miracles he does, Pharaoh's day. And I was shocked, reading a lot of the Israelites, they're like doubting Moses in the desert. They're like, yo, he brought us here to kill us. And I'm thinking to myself, yo, did you not just see the ocean split in half? Like,
right.
I don't know if I don't say I'm better than the Israelites, but I thought to myself, like, man, listen, if I ever saw something like that, who's gonna doubt, man? You know what I mean? Like, did you ever have that thought reading?
Yes, I've had several thoughts that it's weird now thinking them from this side of things. It makes a lot more sense to me.
Okay.
But as a Christian, the thought was, I mean, can you imagine being Satan and thinking that you could overthrow God? Can you imagine being Adam and Eve and seeing God in the garden and still choosing to disobey? All I've had all those kinds of thoughts. Yeah. And then, like you said, giving yourself maybe the benefit of the doubt that maybe you wouldn't have, responded the way they did, especially if you didn't have a sin nature. But then you think like, well, neither did they. So
no, it's true. It's true. So I'm reading all this, and I finally get through my Bible. And the next year I read this one, the King James. So I read the King James, and I start to really familiarize myself with the text and what's in there. And I'm starting to realize too that a lot of the stuff I was learning in school, I'm like, this isn't, like, for example, I took a class in my grad school, on foreknowledge and free will, which is just basic. If God is all knowing, and he knows what you're going to do tomorrow, how the heck do you have free will to do what you're going to, like, how can that be free? And so there are a whole lot of Christian philosophers who wrestle with this. I took a whole seminar just reading grad paper or published papers on this issue. Boethius deals with this issue, so I'm reading all these contemporary philosophers. Some of them have just outright now, again, because I had now read the Bible and I was now reading the Bible, I'm starting to scratch my head at some of these. I'm like, some of these are straight heretical, to me, because I'm looking at this in the Bible. King David says, my thoughts. You know what I'm going to do before I do it. Nothing can be hid from you. And there's some Christian philosophers who are like, maybe God doesn't know. He's like a chess master. like when you do something, he knows how to counter that. So that way, like, and I'm like, nah, man, that's weird. So I started to take like a more biblical centered approach. I said, nah, the Bible's pretty clear, like God knows. So that was already my, I guess, again, my Bible beliefs. Like God knows, he's all knowing. Bible says. So now it became more so going back to, I guess, some of my old, I don't want to say old beliefs, because I didn't really have these beliefs. I went to church because my parents took me to church. But I wasn't a Christian because I had ever thought about my views. It was like, you got to go to church. Is what it was. Like, okay, cool. I'll go to church. And yeah, so that's basically, I mean, that's it. I think I've covered all the main points of how I went from skepticism.
Right. So you've been back in the faith, and probably not back, probably in the faith for real, for the first time.
Yeah, I would say.
How many years now?
I would say starting in grad school, because once I got to Oklahoma, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna stick to the Protestant faith. But I didn't go back to Assemblies of God necessarily. I don't have anything against Assemblies of God. I just didn't go back there. But I decided to aim to find a church that was, kind of, especially after reading my Bible, was, very much centered on this is the truth. But at the same time, we also believe in like mirror, and believe it or not, there's a lot of charismatic churches that are not necessarily AOG Assembly.
Yeah,
that's kind of where I gravitated to, because and I'll make this my final point, I guess. As I was reading through the scriptures, when I got to the book of Acts, and you mentioned this in your video, your 6 stages of deconversion. When I got to the book of Acts, I'm reading this Bible and I'm looking at the book of Acts, and I'm like, okay, these guys, Peter, Paul, I don't know too much about Paul, but yeah, actually no, Paul, yeah, he has this issue with like a snake bites him and nothing happens to him, right? And they're all doing these miracles, because they're all receiving the power of the Holy Ghost. And I'm looking at that like, what happened to this? Like, did this just disappear? And you mentioned this, like, that's one of the stages of deconversion, is going to the cessationist world, because you kind of are able to excuse God. You mentioned, and I was watching your video, like, I actually agree with that. I agree that could potentially be a catalyst for deconversion.
That's why Jay Witt said, if I was still in the charismatic church, I would probably still be a believer, because at least you have something to attach to say this is still happening today. Whether or not, I mean, we could debate about whether or not it's really, those things are really what people say they are, but at least you have something.
Exactly. Yeah. I 100%.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me share this too. One thing I forgot to add in that video was, when Jay Witt said that, I was thinking, I think that's why denominations that are more cessationist, that's why they cling to an inerrant Bible, because that is their miraculous thing. Because we don't have signs and wonders still going on, an inerrant Bible becomes our sign and wonder.
You know what? I'm 100% in agreement with you on that. I agree. I didn't know the difference, to be honest with you, because I come from a philosophical background. I didn't know the difference between infallibility and inerrancy. I didn't even know that was a debate. I was kind of like, what does that even mean? So when you defined it in your videos, I said, oh, okay. I guess, to me, and especially now coming at it from like a historical point of view, infallibility makes more sense than inerrancy. Because I think a lot, like, I know, for example, if we're talking about who wrote the Bible, going way back to what I mentioned at the beginning, who wrote the Bible, I think the Bible was definitely compiled by various sources. That's not disputable, because you see, even you just do a superficial read through the scriptures, right? It's like, we're not the acts of these kings recorded by Iddo the seer. Right. And it's like, what happened to all these books? They're gone. Right. But we still got this one. right?
Mhm.
So it's like a compilation of various sources. One source could have messed up.
Mhm.
You know, like I missed this. This is not the exact count of soldiers that was
Right.
fighting in the field. Does that to me, that's just kind of a mark of human error. You see it all the
Right.
time in the scriptures, like this verse is not included in this manuscript, but it is in this. And Bart Ehrman mentions this. It's like, yeah, it could have been just a copyist
Right.
error. He got tired, sleepy in
Right.
the middle of the night, forgot to write it down. So to me, infallibility makes more sense. To me, inerrancy is much more difficult
Mhm.
to prove. And at the same time, I mean, just kind of looking at the book of Acts, kind of saying like, yeah, you know, God doesn't do any of that anymore. And it's like, okay, if you're Bible centered, where is that?
Mm.
There's no
Yeah.
verse that says, all right, and all these things ceased
Right.
after the apostles passed away. So to me, it just never it never made sense. I had to look at that and say, where is this today? Does
Yeah.
this exist today? Yeah, I found more credibility with the charismatic movement because of that reason.
Yeah.
I didn't believe, you know, the whole all right, this is done now. Miracles.
Yeah.
Because then it gives the atheist too, like from the atheist perspective, right? You see a lot of atheists bring this up all the time, like, yo, this God, he was very active in the BC era. Man, this God, this was the God. You're right. This God was awesome. I don't know what happened to AD though.
Yeah, it's one of the things that stands out to me is the criticism of, you know, people always say, well, we don't see it that much in our society, but go overseas, go to a third world country and you see it. To me, that's not a strong case for it though, because what you're basically talking about is go to where people are less skeptical. Now that could be, you know, like with Jesus, he couldn't do many miracles there because there was no faith. So maybe the skepticism means there aren't going to be any miracles, but it could also be the case that the skepticism means people can spot your BS quicker in places where there's skepticism. So the fact that you see it overseas and not here, to me, is not a strong case for it. But it's like, why does the number of the claims of the miraculous decrease when our ability to test it increases? And so I would think if that is something God is doing, if God is still doing those kinds of things, I mean, in the age of the internet, you know what I mean? Like, and cell phones, if God was going to show himself strong and mighty and active and all that, we have any number of opportunities for that to happen. I remember there were times when I tried to get God to do things to, you know, to prove himself to me. Like, I can't force God to do that. God doesn't owe me that. But at the same time, at some point you have to say, when I have to, at some point you end up saying, like, I don't know what to do then. Like, is it up to me to just believe? Or is it up to God to produce, you know, the faith in me, to give me reasons to believe?
Okay. Can you flesh that out a bit? Because that's
yeah. So for instance,
that's a pretty profound
there are people
thought.
who would say, you know, there are people right now praying that I return to the faith.
Yeah.
And in my inbox on Facebook every day, there are people talking about, you know, I hear what you're saying, brother, but that's a huge gamble. You're gambling with your soul. If God can't prove himself to you, you know, hell awaits. And I'm saying, okay, what would you have me do then? Because I can't control what I believe. I'm either convinced of the evidence or I'm not. Now, God could convince me. It's one thing if God does what he knows it would take to convince me, and I'm still like, nope, I won't believe. Okay, that's on me. But if I'm laying out, here are the reasons why I don't believe, I can't get myself to believe that. And hell awaits me if I can't. If I could, I would.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm asking, like, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to say I believe when I don't? I can't make but an all-wise, all-powerful God could do that which would cause me to believe. And so I'm sort of at his mercy if he exists, because I don't know what to do other than, wait for him to win back my faith. Like he won you back. You know what I mean? He could win me back unless I'm just resisting, his wooing, as it were.
Pascal makes that argument. It's funny.
Yeah, the wager.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the wager argument. He's like, you're better off believing.
Yeah.
What did you think about that? How did you feel about that?
Well, to me, that makes several assumptions, because better off believing assumes that you know which God to believe. But why would I settle on this one God?
Yep.
Especially when what I'm saying, you want me to trust you, but I'm looking at nature, I'm looking at reality, and I'm looking at what you say in your text. Like, no, this ain't what happened in history. So if I was going to believe a God, it would be a God who tells the truth. To me, that rules the biblical God out. Unless we're going to get into all these, but if you take it this way, and if you look at it like this, and maybe they were doing polemic, and maybe they were, but then you have all these issues with, like I said, with the New Testament versus the Old. So I'm like, even if I were to take that wager, I wouldn't know which God to bet on, because I haven't seen a God who's got it right in terms of, I'm going to tell you how it all started. I'm going to tell you what happens after death. I'm going to tell you, show me something divine and consistent. And then I'd be like, okay, if I'm going to place my wager, I'm going to place it on that one, because at least that God got this right. There's some reason to think it's the right God to bet on.
Yeah,
and I lost that. Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off prematurely.
No.
I teach this to my students. I teach Pascal's wager to my students. We talk about faith. I have the section on God. Can you prove God exists? And we look at the arguments, and then these arguments against. But one of the things we talk about is faith. Pascal says, put your faith because you're better off. But that's one objection to his argument that I have no rebuttal for. I don't present it in my class because I don't think there is a good rebuttal to that. And
I think he was in such a Christianized worldview that as wise as he was, I think his prejudices maybe kept him from even seeing that as this could be a defeater of this argument. I don't know why he wouldn't have, you know what I mean? Unless he's just assuming there's no other God but this one.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, he's a Catholic writing in France. So, I mean, the Catholic God is the God,
Right.
You're right. Putting him in his historical context, that makes a lot of sense. But I guess South Park, they have a parody on this, because people, I don't know if you've seen the movie, but I guess all these people, they die. I haven't seen the movie either, but it's just, you can look it up on YouTube. They die, and then they're all in hell. And the guy, I guess he's giving the people like an orientation. He's like, all right, so just so you all know, you're dead. Welcome to hell, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, so I just, and everyone's like, hey, wait a sec. I was a Protestant. And the other guy's like, oh, I was a Catholic. And I'm like, I was a Jew. And he's like, yeah, you were all wrong. And then they're like, what's the right religion? And they're like, oh, it was Mormonism. So I show that to my students to kind of show, to highlight.
Interesting. Yeah.
The parody of this argument.
Right.
Sure, you can put your faith in this one God, but how do you know? How do you know it's the right God? So I agree.
Yeah.
But okay, reading the Bible, and I got this from reading the Bible. Looking at all these, I guess all these claims, right? You have Paul, and Paul says, the Lord appeared to me on Damascus. And I remember reading this when I was a skeptic and thinking, well, that's great, Paul. I'm glad God appeared to you.
Right.
What about me?
Right.
Are you more important than me? Like, how did this happen? How come he gets this divine he's trying to go out and persecute these Christians, but God appears to him. I'm over here trying to look for truth, man. I'm like begging for some answers. and I don't get anything. You know, it's
Mm.
kind of like that line by Kanye West. What did he say? He says, praying on God's hotline, but he keeps giving me hotline.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I when I heard that, I'm like, man, I can relate to that.
Mm.
But so
Mm.
I'm looking at all these claims in the Bible, right? And you see the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
Paul says, first, you know, appear to the women at the tomb. Then it was Peter, and then it was James, and James is a skeptic, and you appear to James, and all these people, and Thomas touched his hands, and Jesus like, blessed are all those who hear and have faith, and I'm looking at all these, and I said, okay, more claims of miracles. I look at in the Bible, Ezekiel. Let's go Old Testament, right? Ezekiel. I saw God. I literally saw this guy. Isaiah. Yo, me too. I saw the same thing. Book of Revelation. I saw John the Revelator. I saw the same thing. And they're all like, they all have consistent claims. Like I saw the resurrection. He saw the resurrection. They all have consistent claims, but they're all just claims, like so I thought to myself, look, if God does something miraculous, if he appears to people, if he does this, that's great for the person who gets that experience. As the person reading about the experience, what do we do with that testimony? Because it's testimony. I mean, all history is testimony. And that opened up another can of worms, which was, can we trust this? Can we trust these claims? Because I mean, some of these claims are, they're so, I guess, out of the ordinary, like Moses is making like frogs come out of the Red Sea. And there's, one of the miracles that got me when I was reading the Bible was, how in the world was it completely dark in Egypt, but in the ocean there was light? Like how did God make that happen? And I'm reading this, so you could I was still a Christian, but even still I had this skeptical kind of, how did this happen? And I'm reading this, like, would they say these claims if it was a lie? Why make something this crazy up? And so I guess going back to what I was, saying earlier, which was, or what you were saying earlier, which was, you were kind of hoping that God would reach out to you. And my question, I guess, from all of this, my question to you is it enough evidence for you to have these claims, or would belief in God require the same experience that happened to these guys in the past? Like,
that's a great question.
Yeah,
that's a great question.
Can I stimulate your thought a bit? Can I stimulate your thought a bit? Because Gary Habermas asks a great question when he's giving his resurrection argument. He says, did Alexander the Great exist? And I said, when I first saw the video, I'm like, yeah. And he's like, how do you know? And I said, well, the historians write about him. It makes sense that he existed because that's how Greek spread everywhere, It makes sense. And he's like, the earliest source we got for Alexander the Great is plus 400 years. And he's like, but there's no way we can go back in time into a time machine and figure out, like, if the claims made by Arian, who writes about him 400 years later, if these claims made are 100% accurate, if we really did this and that, how much of this is, like, we can never know. And so the question, I guess, comes down to, what do you believe in history and why? Given that the Bible is making these claims and saying, this really happened. These are real historical events. That, again, begs the question, how do we know they're right? This opens up a can of worms about history, which is, what do you believe? What can you believe? I mean, God is something that if you believe in God, it's not like he just existed in the past. He exists now. He can prove himself now. Versus Alexander's dead and gone.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
so yeah, let me address it this way.
Go ahead. Yeah.
We have a podcast episode on why revelation is untrustworthy.
Okay.
Not just the claims of it, like how do we know, but even the people who received the revelation in the first place, why they should have questions about the revelation. Mm-hmm. So somebody else's revelation is problematic for me to take as a claim, and the revelation appearing to me is problematic because how do I know? So for instance, if Paul says Satan himself appears as an angel of light, how do I know that the angel appearing to me, or the theophany, or God appearing to me, or the light that appeared to Paul, how does Paul know that it wasn't an angel of light? Mm-hmm. Or Satan appearing as an angel of light, deceiving him to believe in Jesus? How does he know that? Mm-hmm. So there's the difficulty of the person receiving the revelation to even confirm that this is really God revealing himself to me. There's several other reasons why it should be difficult to affirm or confirm this was God speaking to Paul or to me. So that points me away from an experience or revelation, and it makes me more desirous of what God would need to do to garner my belief is stop playing by the rule of belief. Be present. Like, be a part of the world that I have to respond to on an ongoing basis, and I will respond to you on an ongoing basis. If you appear today and you're going tomorrow and I have to remember that you appeared, at some point, I may forget. I may second guess the appearance. Other people might convince me only you saw it. Then how you know it really happened? It could have happened in my mind. But if God becomes a reality that we all have to respond to because he's just part of the natural world, then it's not something we have to believe. It's something we have to respond to. This is how we deal with one another as human beings. I don't believe I'm talking to you. I have to respond to you. The second I stop having to respond to you, I don't concern myself with you. Like once we end this stream, I'm not going to be living in light of Alexander unless you've presented me with something where I have to. If you tell me, hey, next Saturday I'm coming to Philly, and then I'll live in light of you. But if you don't become a present reality next Saturday, then I'll stop living in light of you. So I'm just saying that to say, I think the idea of belief in other people's claims and belief in my past experiences, it sort of loses its teeth when I say, nah, I think I'd rather just respond to reality. Until God proves he's part of reality, I don't know what to do with him. God is a concept at this point. So and that's a great question. God revealing himself versus the claims, I think both of them are problematic. The claims more so, the revelation less so, but the revelation is still problematic. I think, people say, well, God can't reveal himself to you because that would remove free will. That would be God constraining your obedience. Adam and Eve saw God. They still disobeyed. Satan apparently, saw God. He still rebelled. So apparently God being present is not a deterrent from people still having free will, if they're going to have free will. All I'm saying is I think I'm to the point now where I don't want to play by the rule, by the rules of faith. It's too subjective. It's too transient. If you're a part of reality, just be a part of reality, and we'll know, and we'll have no choice but to respond to you. And it may cause you to have to judge us because we disobeyed. We may obey, but I would say let's deal with that as opposed to this, hey, you just got to trust that they got the revelation.
Can I ask you a
Sure.
follow-up? And I guess with this, we'll have to end it. But when you say be present, can you give me like a picture of what that would look like? Yeah.
So if God is omnipresent,
yeah,
like it's interesting that when God gives people revelations of himself, they see him localized. You know, someone sitting on the throne and the appearance of lightning and all these things. He's localized. Yeah. But if you're omnipresent, so I wrote a fiction series called City of Allegory, where I was allegorizing the Bible. And then I had this part of the allegory. This is back when I was a believer. This part of the allegory called Around the Unending Table. And there's an unending table with all the people that God has saved around this unending table. How does the table not end? Don't know. But God is seated next to everyone at the table. How? And so I just developed this thing where there's this refracting, bending light that makes God present to everyone who's there. I'm just trying to dream up ways to make him omnipresent and yet still localized. But that's me and my limited, mind trying to figure out how that could work. That's not my problem to figure out how. That's God's. Like if you're omnipresent, yet you want to be present with each of us, what does Revelation say? There'll be no need for a sun, for God himself will be the light of the city. If you're going to be that ambient as the sun, you could be that present with each person. Can you imagine if the religious experience, the same way that we share testimonies, right? How'd you come to faith? Well, I had this happen and that happened and that happened, and I ended up at the foot of the cross. Yo, same thing happened to me. I saw my sinfulness and da-da-da. The same way that we share those heartwarming testimonies, can you imagine if we all had revelations or experiences that were, yo, how'd you know he was real? Well, I had this, this, and this. Yo, I know it must be real because I had the same. There would be something that would make us say, he must be real because we all experience, as opposed to who did he appear to? Him 2,000 years ago. Okay, cool. You know what I mean? I don't want to have to solve that dilemma. I think an all powerful, all wise, omnipresent God could.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, man. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We got 4 minutes left. It sounds like just going back to what you said in the City of Allegory, Allegory, I think this is what makes sense to me. And I guess when I was thinking about it later on as a Christian, because in the beginning I saw the issue from the church council perspective of, all right, we got to get our doctrine right. We got to figure out what is the Holy Spirit. Is the Holy Spirit also God, or and it made sense from there. But just as a logical thought too, the Holy Spirit also made a lot of sense to me because I said, God the Father, he knows everything. He's kind of like this omnipresent. I want to say like he's all knowing. They got same. I guess is again. I'm not an expert on the Trinity, but let me just cut to the chase.
Well, Christian doctrine or theologians would say each person of the Trinity, they all share the same attributes. So there's not an attribute that the Son lacks, that the Father has. The Son only paused or limited his all-knowingness while he was here. But the Son is eternal. They're coexistent, co-eternal. Even though the Son emanates from the Father, the Son is eternal, just like the Father. So they share all three. All three share the same attributes. That's what they would say.
Okay, what about omnipresence? Would they say that, for example, what I was going to get to is this, like the Holy Spirit would and should be available to every believer at the same time, which is how it would make sense of in your book when you write about how God could be, you think about him as like a light. But when you think about it in terms of a spirit, it also makes sense because, spirit is not limited to space and time because we're stuck in space and time.
Well, the Bible says God is spirit.
Correct.
And when it says God is spirit, the Christian would say that God is a Trinitarian being. So the Father, Son, and the Spirit are spirit. Like they're yeah, see, those are the conundrums that make you say, wait, what do I believe again? This is interesting. Like, okay.
Yeah, it sounds like we would have to get past a lot of technical language
Yeah.
to begin to talk about this. Yeah. All right. Well, hey man, it's 2:38. I don't want to keep
Hey, good stuff, man. Let's chop it up. Everything does not have to be, recorded. If you get a chance to dive into the book, I mean, we could do this again. But I would just want to say to you, I think what I really enjoy about your faith is the fact that you are, whether you believe or don't believe or believe again, it's the fact that you're asking questions and you care about the answers. And I've got to the point where I begin to just say, I think we're all journeying. And I just think the best thing that we can do is journey well, to not turn away from certain questions and to not predispose ourselves to certain answers, but to follow the evidence where it leads. So I look forward to being able to chop it up with you at any time. So
yeah, I agree 100%, man. And when I get your book, I'll let you know. And then if you want, and I'll mention this really fast because I was going to mention that thing that I forgot. I remember.
Oh, okay.
Go figure it right at the end. But you were, I guess, upset. It seemed like you were upset in one of your YouTube videos where you talk about, I guess, I don't remember the title of the video, but you were addressing the videos that had addressed your book.
Yeah.
You were discussing ambassador's response and this person's response. And I guess you were upset because you felt they didn't give you a fair shake. Because it sounded like they were addressing like arguments or something, and they weren't wrestling with the rest of the book. It was almost
right. So several of them would just read the chapter that they were asked to respond to.
Yeah.
Without reading the book. And the way the book is written, it like what I say in chapter 9 is based on what I cover in chapter 3 and chapter 5. So if you don't read that and you just read chapter 9, you're like, what is he talking about? And you dismiss it. That was sort of the treatment, especially from Ambassador and several others.
Okay, so what I can do if you want, man, I can go through the book. I'll go through the whole thing, and I'll be open and say I read it and say give my honest piece about it. It's a long book. Maybe I could do it in parts or something, but however you want, man. But if you ever want to think up in the future, I'm completely open to it.
That's what's up. Hey, well, great to meet you, man. Great to chop it up with you.
Likewise, buddy.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I look forward to more.
I appreciate the time. I really appreciate the time.
My pleasure. So.
All right, man.
All right,
Take
care. Be
care.
well, man. Yep. Much love.
All right.
Peace.
Likewise.